Thanks for tuning in to the Women's Vibrancy Code, a podcast dedicated to helping women move from exhausted to energized, balance their hormones, and feeling turned on by their life, their lover, and themselves. I'm your host, Maraya Brown. I'm a Yale and functional medicine trained women's health expert, midwife, mom, keynote speaker, and self-made entrepreneur. I'm the founder of my signature program, the Women's Vibrancy Code. So sit back, relax, and let's chat about your energy, hormones, libido, and embracing your feminine power. Oh, and you might want to have pen and paper to take some notes on some of these episodes. Maraya Brown here. I am so excited to be here with Miss Portia Jackson. For those of you in the listening to the Women's Vibrancy Code podcast, let's have a juicy conversation. So I have with me the founder of Empowered to Exhale, Dr. Portia Jackson Preston. She is a Black woman with ADHD who is also autistic. She advocates for inclusive approaches to wellness, and she just returned from Japan, Thailand, and Singapore, and a deep inhale and fill up. So join us as we talk about personal deep self-love and navigating neurodivergence. I have more of her bio, but there's a couple key points. Associate Professor of Public Health at Cal State Fullerton, published several papers, working on a book, does deep work with stress and self-care among Black women, and also a great TEDx talk. It looks like two of them, both UC Irvine and Crenshaw. And she earned her bachelor's degree from Stanford University and her master's of public health, and also has background in UCLA. So there's a lot there. I'll make sure her websites and everything are in the bio. But Portia, hi, welcome.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so we have to start out telling a story. So for those of you that know much of my work, you might have heard that I left Fortune 50 and went to become a midwife. And I did a round the world trip for a year and ended up at Yale, and I've been a women's health provider since. So when I was in Fortune 50, I worked with Procter & Gamble. I interned with them for 2 summers and then hired on full-time. And when I was full-time, I had the esteemed privilege of running the National Internship Program. And a lot of those interns came through the Inroads program, not all. But Portia Jackson was one of those interns. What year was that, Portia?
1998.
1998. And so I think, if I remember correctly, we must have interned together for one summer. And then the next summer, maybe I was running the internship program. And we were in LA, right?
We were. Yes, we were. I was 16.
It's amazing. Oh, right. Because you finished high school early and you were the whippersnapper off to Stanford and interning with Procter and Gamble. And you've had a pretty successful life.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Very grateful for that.
And it's so fun that we've maintained contact and we've had a couple conversations in the interim, and I'm just like out there cheering her on. It was Amber Chitty. She's like, "You're not going to believe who I just bumped into." I'm like, "No way." Okay. And so just give us a little snapshot. Sure. You also left Fortune 50.
I did. So
go ahead. And embarked on what?
All 4 years, I thought I was going to go full time, but there was this part of me that really wanted to go into public health. So I ended up going to get my MPH from Michigan. And I said, if I could do anything in my career, I would love to work for the CDC. And I was really fortunate because that actually ended up being my first job out of my program. So I worked for the CDC for 2 years, made a promise to myself that I was going to leave after 2 years to get my doctorate. So I started at USC, ended up getting my degree from UCLA. From there, I actually went to management consulting, worked for Deloitte for 2 years, then had this interesting health journey and ended up taking a sabbatical, pivoting careers. I worked for Susan G. Komen as a consultant, and then I landed a job as a professor, first as a lecturer, and then I got a tenure track position. So I think UCLA, Cal State LA, and ultimately I'm at Cal State Fullerton. So.
And along the journey, you've become super, super passionate about a couple things that I've heard. One, this concept of inclusive approaches to wellness. And then along the journey, also having a diagnosis of ADHD and autism much later on in life, which has been a bit of a U-turn for you personally, not U-turn, but maybe a bit of a divergence, so to speak.
Seriously.
For you personally, but also professionally.
Yeah. Yeah.
You want to talk a little bit about that?
It's been so wild. So I think I got diagnosed on April 2nd, which happens to be Autism Awareness or Acceptance Day. And so I really have just been waiting in the thick of it for the past couple of months. I found out that I had ADHD a couple of years before that. But this journey really started when I was finishing my doctorate, and I just really didn't even think stress could affect your health. I was used to pushing myself and ended up getting diagnosed with kidney disease right after I finished grad school. So I literally crossed the stage getting biopsies, not telling people about it. And so as I was starting management consulting, I was actively trying to treat kidney disease and ended up having a blood clot at my first client. So it was about 6 weeks into the job. Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Just imagine, you're at the hotel with your manager and you're trying to think about how you're going to ask them to drop you off at the emergency room on their way to work. Right. So I've just had this really wild journey. And fortunately, that went into remission after a year. So that meant that it was treatable with medication and has really kind of been a backdrop of my career. But this lingering fatigue and brain fog, no one could really address. So I just spent years going to different doctors and them saying, well, maybe you have fibro, maybe you have some ambiguous autoimmune condition. And I kind of figured out the ADHD a couple of years ago. There were a lot of clues. There's a lot of clues there. But the autism actually only came to the surface when I started to treat the ADHD with medication. All of a sudden, all of these patterns just started to appear. And I was able to get my diagnosis earlier this year. And so, as you said, it is a U-turn because you start to look at everything that you've done in your life and what you've experienced through a different lens of understanding, frustration, and ultimately acceptance.
So a couple things that I heard. Number one was I didn't realize stress could impact my wellness or my health. Ding, 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 ding. And then number two, what I heard is it was the treatment of the ADHD that then kind of moved, maybe cleared the veil a little bit. So then you could, with support, I'm guessing, better recognize the autistic diagnosis. And at what age were you with ADHD diagnosis? And then at what age with the autism diagnosis?
So just a couple of things there. I would say that from that time where I was just rubbing, this against this idea of stress impacting your health, that was really about my culture contract, what I had to do to be successful. So I didn't feel like I had the luxury of really registering how much that hard drive was impacting me. And so I would imagine for the time I was diagnosed with kidney disease at 30, I probably did not figure out the ADHD until roughly 39 or so.
Wow.
And then autism, I didn't actually get treatment for ADHD until a couple years later. And so, like you said, it unmasked the symptoms, and that was at 42.
Okay. And since then, it's kind of shifted your career path and how you want to advocate and support people. From what you're finding, is that pretty common that for women, so first for people, then for women of color, are there general trends that the research is finding with late diagnosis?
I think that's the type of research that I need to help advocate for and create.
That's my girl. That's the Portia Jackson that I know.
Yeah, because, a lot of the research and neurodivergence obviously includes conditions other than ADHD and autism. You have Down syndrome conditions, but most of the research is centered on, white men. And so there's this stereotype of autism being young white boys who are interested in trains. And so there are people who are publishing on the experience of BIPOC communities, that intersectionality of being BIPOC and neurodivergent. I haven't seen a lot that I would like to see on the intersection adding in a late diagnosis, but
Yeah.
that's a wave that I definitely want to be a part of. And that's why I'm really grateful that I was already studying inclusive approaches to wellness. And I was thinking about intersectional approach because now I'm like, great, we are really going to focus on neurodivergence. And it's already just a cohesive part of my agenda. So,
Yeah.
well,
Okay. So next question, and we're just going to weave throughout all of this. Since the diagnosis,
yeah.
how do you think it's changed? Well, a couple different diagnoses. How do you think it's changed how you show up in the world, how you show up in your partnerships, how you go to the grocery store, how you approach your work and your time management and your calendar and how you socialize out in the world? I imagine there's a lot of new self-awareness, which then goes, here's how I've always done it. I'm going to try a new way. I'm wondering if you can walk us through some of that journey.
Yeah, and I'll start with where you were with the last question, asking about the trend of late diagnosis. That's really common for a lot of women. We're socialized from a young age. This is how you're supposed to behave, in a social sense. And so it takes a long time for us to even figure out that there's a mask. And it usually comes when our coping strategies start to fall apart. So I'm this person who literally teaches stress management. I help other people create their unique wellness journey. I have navigated chronic illness. I feel like I've done the things. I filled the bingo card. I did not see this one coming. And so it flipped everything on its head. And I actually really got down into the answers because I went through a severe depression. And I was looking at my calendar yesterday and I realized it was roughly 1 year ago when this began. And I remember because you and I talked.
Yeah, I remember you were getting into a cab. You were on a vacation and you were leaving me a voice message just going, oh my gosh, my life is kind of unraveling a bit.
And it was amazing because at that moment I was actually speaking at MomCon, Convention for Mothers, and the women who took the cab with me from the airport literally started to call me to talk about the unraveling. That's what we want to hear about, not your degrees. We want to hear about how you're going through this because we're there too. So it's been extremely humbling. And I'm grateful because I'm at a point, I would say recently, where I can actually identify this piece of integration. It's not that I can no longer do the things that I used to do. It's that now I'm actually aware that I have sensory challenges. So it's very difficult for me to know how much energy do I have. Before, I would just sign up and give it all away. And I would people please, and I would struggle with boundaries because a lot of that was a mask, right? And so as you become conscious of that and you understand the cost, well, I don't want to go into burnout. Okay, I need to think differently. Conventional time management strategies don't work for me. How can I adapt? What am I responding well to? What am I struggling with? And rather than condemning those as flaws, turning them around into needs.
Yeah. And, I've heard you mention masking and unmasking. The book Unmasking Autism, you suggested it's such a fascinating, I listened to it.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming, tell me if this is right, you finished high school at age 16, off to Stanford, master's degrees, internship with one of the top companies. You can see how the quote unquote coping mechanisms that you developed also served you to experience great success. But what I'm hearing is it got to the point where when stress and burnout crossed over an edge, the coping mechanisms became unraveled. And then the success that has always been could no longer be sustained.
Yeah.
So for those that are listening, what are some of can you just kind of rattle off, what are some of the symptoms? What are some of the behaviors, some of the clues?
Sure.
If someone's going, well, gosh, what if I'm neurodivergent? How do I know? Can you kind of talk through some of that?
Yeah. So the first thing to know is that autism and ADHD, some people call it ADHD. So imagine that these two are in a rap battle because they actively work against each other. So the autistic part of me wants routines, but the impulsive, hyperactive, just like hyper focus of ADHD is like, I want to do everything my own way all the time right now. And so it's super spontaneous. And so I've had to learn that I need options. I need for things to be a little bit more indirect. I really have a bad case of time blindness. So the best time for me to get ready for this call is about approximately a minute before, right? Or, I really want
to... Okay, wait. I got to interrupt for a second. So just so you all know, Portia,
Yeah.
We hopped on time, but then there was another 10, maybe 15 minutes of where am I going to sit? How's the lighting? Where's the microphone? So I'm just seeing it real time.
And I knew that about myself, which is why I reached out to you half an hour before. And I said, when
Yeah.
you say on time, do you mean call in on time or do you mean 15 minutes before? Because I know that but you people think about this differently than I do. And
Right,
so
totally.
I'll have a class that I think takes 30 minutes. It'll take 6 hours. But then you give me something really complex that I can hyper focus on, and I might impress you and do it immediately. So I've had a lot of people say, well, you can't be ADHD, you can't be autistic because you never would have achieved these things. What they're not understanding is when you look at the intersection of being a Black woman and being neurodivergent, you are trying to survive your environment. You are trying to ensure that you are successful. You are wearing this mask already for Blackness. Am I Black enough? Am I doing the things I need for acceptance, both in my community and in my professional environments? So when people tell me to unmask, I'm like, that's not possible. At best, I can be conscious of my mask, right? We are harder on ourselves.
That is so big, right? Because there's this, it's easy to say we just simply need to unmask,
Yeah.
but you layer on the masks that at this point kind of are required of you based on your gender, your color of skin, the expectations of your lineage, and also the career path that you've chosen.
Yeah. And so you're crumbling at the idea of trying to figure out who you are if you are not all of these things. We process a lot more information than people do at any given time. So we really are more exhausted. We're not lazy. We're overwhelmed. Our brains are not able to process the information. And so you feel shame for that. And I have bad coordination. So I spill things every day. I create recipes and I forget to put the eggs in tuna salad, and I walk by and go, what's that? And I've always heard, oh, slow down and pay attention, but people don't understand my brain is actually different.
Yeah.
So when you start to understand that, it's like there's this opening to actually love yourself because you're no longer this like mess up who is just somehow not getting it right. And it's very hard for people to understand how you might be really great at things you can hyper focus on, which for me, fortunately, have been things that are well aligned with what science society values. How can you struggle with basic tasks? How is it hard for you to go to bed? How is it that your brain won't let you go to sleep? How is it that, you don't remember that you're hungry or that you have to use the restroom, or you don't know how to act around people if you're able to get on the stage and do TED Talks? How can you simultaneously speak on stage confidently and then have a meltdown sitting in the audience because you're overwhelmed by the noises?
Yeah.
And when the skill regression happens, it's so quick. So one day I love going out to like events, and the next day, every time my friends ask me to do things, I have to slow down and ask myself, how are you actually going to feel in that environment? Do you need to wear your loop headphones? Do you need to explain to them? I don't know how I will feel until that day. So there's just a slowing down for me that's been important to take care of myself. And I've heard a lot of people say, well, you don't really need to know. And in the community, we really value self-diagnosis because a lot of people don't have the access to resources they need to get that. What matters bottom line is being able to identify the symptoms and leverage whatever resources you have to help yourself. I know that was a mouthful.
So good. And so, what are some of the resources that you've brought in and leveraged that are working for you?
Yeah. So one thing is I definitely tried to find out what are the different associations out there. So there's one called CHAD for, I think, children and adults with ADD, and they had a free helpline. They're open 4 hours a day. So I actually called them and I asked them questions. I found out about the ADDA Plus organization that has a lot of information. Of course, YouTube. I watched a lot of videos, and then Threads, because these are the two platforms where I get to hear from other people that are neurodivergent and we explore together. But really what's helping when I think about how I need to plan my day, I tend to save events in my calendar, but on the day of, actually writing out is a good way to make sure that I end up with like 7 to-do items instead of 70. Taking my watch off if I start to have too many notifications, using the do not disturb, realizing how things feel in my body, because the people-pleasing part of you wants to I'll eat every food, I'll make every concession, I'll make everyone comfortable. So now I'm slowing down to say, do you actually like that food? Do you actually like that clothing? Do you actually like spending time in this way? How do you feel after you spend time with this person? And I'm starting to make decisions from a more somatic, position. And that's been really empowering.
Yeah. As I'm listening to you, I can't help but kind of, listen through my own lens. And I keep thinking about my middle child. And she's 10. My guess is at some point we will probably land on a diagnosis of some version of this. And it's been fascinating. I feel like I've been speaking up and advocating for her for years. And so far, it has not been well received. Do you ever go, shoulda, woulda, coulda? Like if someone would have been there to advocate for me and knew this and helped me realize this stuff when I was 15 or just before I went to Stanford, do you ever go there, or do you just go, here I am, grateful for where I am and moving forward?
No, because one thing I'm learning to do is I used to be this person where I thought like everything had to be super positive and you have to be grateful. And no, I need to allow myself to feel all of these feelings. So what would have been better is maybe I could have developed a deeper love for myself earlier. And I would have been able to overcome perfectionism in ways that I have struggled to do until now. At the same time, would I have been identified as someone who could go off to college campuses starting at the age of 13, work a Fortune, 50 job at 16, and all of these doors that have opened? I question whether or not there would have been gatekeepers to say, well, she's extraordinarily sensitive. She shouldn't have been skipped a grade. She really needs support, And so now I just go, well, meet yourself where you are now. That is the answer. At the end of the day, you can think about all of those things, but the only thing you need to do is be present in this moment. What is the best way that I can care for myself? And where can I find community so that I know that I'm not alone?
Yeah. Okay. So let's dig into the self-love piece, because you just came back from Japan, Thailand, Singapore, deep filling up, attending your own, not you host retreats and you facilitate retreats, but this was you in full receivership.
Yeah.
And it sounds like this last couple years has really been just broadening the awareness, desire, and digging deep into, what's really needed here is self-love. What does that look like? How does someone begin? How are you navigating that journey?
I started at the very beginning, which was, wow, I see this husband who loves me. I'd love to love myself that way. That's what got me thinking about self-compassion. And I went on a retreat years ago and I learned some of the tools. And I think what happened for me is, as you go through the harder challenges, you have to dig deeper. That foundation has to get really deep. And so it made me feel like the earlier attempts, was I doing anything at all? Yes, I was. But you have to really think about, it's not standing in the mirror and forcing yourself to say certain things. That feels really awkward at first, right? It is, wow, how do I approach somebody that I really care about? How do I talk to my best friend? How can I start to give myself that type of consideration? So if I would help my best friend through something, what would it look like to help myself? And that's been facilitated by a lot of loss in the past couple of years, by going through depression, acknowledging my anxiety, but most importantly, I have been allowing myself to get the treatment that I need. For so long, I was reluctant to allow medication to be a part of that journey. And I think it's done a tremendous job, both medication and therapy, of helping me to look at myself from a place where I can actually start to connect and give that love. So I was thinking before, and now I am embodying, and I need those tools and support to get there. So it's going to the collective and saying, I don't feel great about myself, but I know you love me. Can you pour into me until I can get my machine going again? So I don't think that self-love is meant to be done in isolation. I think you have to plug into community and be a part of something on some level.
Yeah.
And then
one of my favorite quotes was, what was it? In the support of the right community is where magic happens. So it's something like, in when we mix vulnerability and self-introspection and we add on the right community of individuals, it just puts steroids on it. And just go ahead.
I would add to that psychological safety, because that's really what I've been thinking about with self-compassion. It is making it so that you can be safe with yourself. And if you are constantly allowing people in a way that blows past your inner trust, that hurts, and it is so hard to restore. So how do I start to find safety with myself? And then I can think about pouring safety into community. And that's how we get a safe culture.
Yeah, so it's that both pouring in and receiving from safe community. And it sounds like where one of your starting points was, wow, I can acknowledge that this beautiful husband of mine loves me in a big, bold, expansive way. And I can feel what that feels like and kind of logically understand what that might be like. What if I try the self journey of loving myself and receiving from myself in a way that is already familiar for me to receive from my own husband?
And the hard thing with that is that we expect ourselves to, boom, just do it. But it's more
Mm-hmm.
being than it is a doing. It is a being present with yourself and just looking at that neutrally. And I was reading, actually, I think it was one of Domino Ruiz's books last night, and it just reminded me that society has taught us to look at others as the mirror for who we are. And so if we had this imprinting from a younger age of you're not worthy because, or this is what it means to be whole, you didn't learn these things from yourself. You internalized for your surroundings. And that helps me with forgiveness so much to understand that deep down inside, I don't have it out for myself. I'm just trying really hard to protect myself. And the ways that I'm doing it are no longer helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And
So it's self love, it's being along the journey with a safe container and community of others so there can be the reciprocation of we're trying on new ways of giving and receiving.
and I would say the last part is understanding life is so unpredictable. And so if I feel sad and I say that I am sadness, then can I also be my happiness? Can I be
Mm-hmm.
happy and sad? And so when I realize there's that fluidity and I no longer have to identify as the feeling, I may not be able to let go of it right now, but I know at some point I'm going to be able to. And the last part I'll add, what makes that a container is boundaries. Where do those boundaries need to be soft and permeable, and where do they need to be hard and strong? And we do figure some of that out by ourselves, but we also are really helped when we have safe spaces and community and we can figure that out together.
Yeah. And so medication, therapy have been part of it. Where did you find your community? Or are you
Uh,
still searching for your community?
know what?
What does that
That is
look
an
like?
amazing thing. So I have learned my entire life that I'm a connector and I didn't know why. I am a connector because I grew up constantly losing friends because I was awkward, because I was too much. I had very few people that were consistently my friend from year to year. And so I learned to be a connector as a protective mechanism. So if I go in and I'm the most enthusiastic person in the room and I'm really kind, I'm going to have a friend at the end of the day. So now it's like, okay, how do you bring that into yourself? And so I'm fortunate because when I got diagnosed, I looked around and started talking to my community about what I was experiencing. And they went, great, we're along for the journey. We love you. And that's when I realized, oh my God, I called in the right community. So I would say
Yeah.
it, to bring that to a close, has been about exploring without an agenda, but noticing and observing who do I feel safe with and not requiring that that look exactly like me. But I like having that too.
So good. So good. So to be self-aware of, okay, I've connected, I haven't been able to maintain long-standing relationships, so I learned self-reliance and I could be really efficient and productive. Now, how do I shift this a bit to really bring in those people that I've brought in the journey of connecting
And
that are going to
it's
love me and allow me the space to fully express. And now I have a support network to try on this new way of being.
yeah. And I just want to say that, the strategy of having too many friends is kind of like Goldilocks. That wasn't sustainable. But being alone, that is how I usually, beyond just some necessary solitude, isolation for me leads to depression, leads to a loss of hope. And so I do believe in having different layers of friends. There's people that you call every once in a while and you're well connected. But the core group that I have to depend on now is when I start to have these feelings, instead of isolating, these are the people that I'm committed to reaching out to because they've proven to be reciprocal and invested. And that is most important.
Amazing. And for those that are listening, especially if there are women or women of color listening. First, okay, for those that don't know, can you explain what is BIPOC? And let's add on the layers of what are all the other, is the word nuances, the other nuances that we integrate in when
Yes.
it's when it's women that are juggling this, and then on top of that, women of color.
So when I think of women, I think of cis women, I think of trans women. I'm very, I think I'm allowing myself to really consider all of what fits into that, right? And so the term BIPOC refers to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And a very important thing to know is that most Black women will say, I am Black. They don't want to be identified as BIPOC because it begins to dilute, what is our meaning and our experience and our mattering. But when I use that term, it is making sure that the people that have traditionally been like oppressed or excluded in society are being centered. And so when I do wellness work, and we center those experiences, personally, I heal at a deeper level. I heal differently because I'm able to see an image, a representation that I can resonate with. And when I see that person caring for themselves, it unlocks a permission in me that doesn't exist in society.
So as you're bringing in a community of others that their journey and their desire might be similar to yours, and you offer a way to support them and receive from them in the same vision and journey that you're personally going through, it then supports them, and at the same time is self-fulfilling because you're helping yourself go along the same journey.
And I think for me, what I've actually had to learn is to fill my cup first and to find ways to reliably indicate that I am full enough to share. So for example, if I'm speaking, my preparation begins the night before. What things do I need to do to take care of myself so that I can hollow out and be present, right? If I'm not caring for myself, there's nothing I can do in community. But when I enter into this work, I love working with people from all walks of life. But what I ask them to find out first is, how do you identify? And that consciousness of your own identity now allows you to hold space for other people that are different from you. And you start to allow that wellness is going to look different for each of us. And that's okay. And that's great. What do I value most? What matters to me? And so what I want to do is empower you to develop a vision and a pathway to wellness that is uniquely fitted to your needs, and to allow that to evolve over time.
Yeah. And is it fair to say that for anyone and everyone, no matter the variations, that stress is going to impact their health?
Oh, absolutely. I think I definitely had to flip on that. I've learned so much since then. And, I work with men, I work with women, and it's really interesting to see the different ways in which we experience it and express it. I think for some of us, we feel like we thrive on stress, and it's not until there's a negative impact on our relationships or our health that we are motivated to address it. And I think that we live in a society that really reinforces that. So I think the first thing is getting people to understand, if you feel good, that's not a reliable indicator that you're doing the right things. Let's look at the societal messaging and what is wrong with this idea that you should relentlessly produce. What are your big, motivators in this life? And how do we center that, not just what you are being programmed to do?
Yeah. It reminds me of a quote around a definition of addiction that I heard. And hopefully I have this right. It was, addiction is continued use despite negative consequences. Yeah. And it made me think about emotional addictions. It made me think about work addictions, productivity addictions, our addiction to define success based on perception, degrees, money, success, the measurables, versus going, wow, okay, where did I get myself into this loop where it's actually an addiction that has a negative consequence, and now calling out that stress, whether it's real, imagined, or anticipated, is impacting my wellness.
And what I'd love to offer there as a container for that is, all of those addictions are driven by systems, are driven by society. There's a deprivation of resources and inhumane treatment that combine together to make people more likely to be in an environment where there would be higher use of abusive substances and domestic violence. Sometimes, and this was really something I learned, someone recently was talking to me about hoodoo, which is a cultural practice that was originated in Louisiana. And they were sharing with me that you may be carrying a wound differently. So maybe one person is struggling with alcoholism and you're struggling with workaholism. Yep. And that restoration and that healing and disconnecting from that impulsive stress is how you are going to honor your ancestors and be able to move forward. So I think we have to get past this idea of, well, I'm better than you because I don't have these outward painful indicators. And instead say, wait a minute, in what ways am I numbed to my own reality and just living for societal affirmations of success? And it's the life I want to live.
Yeah.
So I think we all stand in a position where we need to look at
good.
that from a position of awareness.
Yeah, I love it. Let's whittle down a little bit to talk a little more specifically about how you support people in the world. So you're a professor, you're writing a book, you are a keynote speaker, you co-facilitate retreats. Can you just, speak a little bit to how are you currently supporting individuals in the world? And do you have clarity on what that's transitioning into?
Yes, I do. So I would say I have a couple of main foci, and right now that is being a professor, and I'm on sabbatical this coming year. I'm very excited about that.
Whoop, whoop.
Yes, I am an executive coach. So I work with individuals and organizations, particularly organizations that are committed to creating a culture of wellness. So they're willing to look at some of the things that are not going well in their culture so that they can have a better environment, not just for the leaders, but everyone in the culture. And same with individuals, if they want to develop a wellness strategy that's fitted to their needs. As far as retreats, I love creating a container where I can rest and other people can rest. And we understand, across my coaching and my retreats, there's one common idea. You have all of the answers inside of you. You are resourceful. I'm creating a space where you can help yourself to discover that. But ultimately, I want you to be empowered to walk away and do this work. So that's really what I stand on. And my speaking is just a way that I can impact at a further reach, but always with the expectation that whoever I'm speaking to is left with actionable steps to move forward.
Cool. For an individual that's listening, and maybe he or she is like, burnout, what's that? I've got stamina. I'm fine with no sleep. I'm good. In your experience, what are some clues or signs that someone might benefit from going, oh gosh, maybe she's right. Maybe I am stressed out?
I would invite that person to reflect not just for themselves, but also with a few people that they trust about what is the impact of what they're doing. Is this a short term, I'm doing this with this goal in mind, and then I'm going to go back to what is a more sustainable pace for me. If this is truly sustainable for you, then you are not putting the things that you value most at risk. So if you can honestly say that my relationships, my health, everything is where I want it to be, then that's your rhythm. But if it's not, think about what you value and ask yourself what adjustments might I need to make. But I can honestly say, and I'll stand 10 toes down on this, I didn't want to slow down until I had to. I now know that I don't want to risk autistic burnout. I want to be able to stay engaged, to stay present. And so I am willing to explore how to do all of these things differently to scale down my business so that I don't risk losing the things that I value most.
Man, I'm taking a deep breath because I feel like often I'm on the mountaintop with this big drum saying, hello, people, hire me before you're at the breaking point. But inevitably, we'll just continue to put out the fire in front of us until we're at breaking point. And how do we kind of undo that trend?
Yeah, I think
we're going to actually focus on prevention and redefine what that even is.
That's the funny thing about public health. If we're doing our job right, you don't notice it at all. And that's what makes it really hard to secure funding. So I'm used to that from the sector that I'm in, but I do take people where they are. So I've had clients who say, you know what, I'm not going to change these things yet. And if we're together for some time, that might change after 6 months, but I allow them to set the agenda. What matters to you? And if I increase your awareness, at some point, you're going to come to an intention of, okay, this is where I want to go. And I have all the time in the world for you to get there because this is your journey and I'm just here to support you.
So that non-attachment. You also mentioned autistic burnout. So is autistic burnout different than the other kind of burnout, whatever the other kind of burnout is?
Yeah. So there's the traditional burnout, which we think of through work, but it can also be relationships, caregiving, there's all the different routes to burnout. But autistic burnout, what really happened with me was this massive skill regression. As a professor, all of a sudden, it was hard for me to read and write. And that was truly terrifying. I had all this grading to do, and I was like, I just can't do it. I can't pay attention in conversations. I can't process information. And so that was the most, to me, different factor. My sensory awareness changed. So I just became I was always sensitive, but environmental stimuli, and so it's this idea of like, yes, you're struggling with work, but you get to this point where you're not really able to recover that. And because of all these other features of neurodivergence, it just really has horrible implications for your mental and physical health. So there's so much more research that needs to be done, because you can be in stages of burnout while you're continuing to do things. But if it goes too far, you may not be able to recover. And so that's really dangerous. And I think anyone who is neurodivergent needs to know about what is ADHD burnout, what is autistic burnout. And if they're in a situation where they don't feel like they can make a lot of changes, focus on what you can control. Focus on the resources that you do have access to. I want everyone to feel empowered and to know there's no perfect way to do this.
Well, and it seems like also in that is getting clarity on where can I play around with unmasking, and where is it unreasonable for me to even consider unmasking?
Some of my masks are actually useful, but I just want to be more in control of like, okay, I'm going to put this one, I'm going to take this off. Oh, actually, this one will take my entire face off. So I
need my face.
Right. So for me, I don't even think I'm satisfied with unmasking, because the hardest thing for me was I had a lot of people that really questioned this journey for me. So I actually went dark on social media to give myself time and space to just be able to be with this, because so much of my mask is what people knew me as, and it's what I knew me as. So when somebody said, well, you've been masking for a long time, I said, if anything, I have been masked. You're not conscious of this. You don't know exactly what is and what isn't. So I would say it's complicated. And I'm learning, like, what does society expect from me? What does my culture expect from me? What are things that I have taken on as my own that I can now give back? And what is the cost of that resistance? That's what we really have to ask for intersectional populations. If I take off this mask, what is the cost?
Did you say intersexual population? Like as in
population? I said population.
Wait, what?
Population. So we're looking at intersectional identities like Black, female, neurodivergent.
Okay, I'm like, what does copulation have to do with anything?
So for example, if a Black woman is going through depression, it shows up differently. She's still going to work, it's high functioning, she's doing all of the things, but she might be irritable. And then in the work environment is, oh, she's angry. Right. So if you are authentically like, this is how I feel, this is what I'm experiencing, you can't take for granted that people around you are going to understand that and give you that grace. That education and awareness isn't out there. So you might hold back and not choose to just, and the more that you mask, you continue to do more damage to yourself. That's the part to understand. What are the masks that are like costing me and taking a toll? And how do I take care of that? So if I wanted to go out and say, I got over depression and I'll teach you how to never experience it again, that's a terrible mask for me. But if I say I struggled with depression a year ago, here's how I came through it, and here are the ways that I'm making sure I stay connected to community so I don't have to go there again, I am not masking as somebody who is invulnerable. And so I'm protecting myself because I'm not setting this expectation that I now have to live out and perform in front of people. And I really want to say that that was a scary mask to pull off, because I did feel lonely in that space. But I was fortunate that I had audiences who were like, oh my God, please, yes, say this to my company, say this to my people. And so I'm just learning the people that I'm supposed to work with are the people that want to have real conversations. They're leaders who need to close the door and come to terms with what they're really experiencing and how they want to move forward.
Powerful. And so what the world is wanting is more you sharing the unraveling process and hearing the real stories, because we lean into the storytelling and it needs to be shared. And then I also heard the unique experience of a Black woman. Even, I remember there was one conversation you and I were having, and you were talking about how a Black woman will fill out a rating system, like for instance, rating pain or rating the degree of, will you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So this is when I was doing the the scale to figure out if I had major depression. And someone said, Black women have a tendency to rate themselves on their best day instead of their worst. So you're feeling like, yep, I'm this and I'm that. And you hear is that. but you are actually not going to hit the threshold for treatment. You're not going to qualify because you're not even able to unmask to yourself. That strong Black woman is so wired into our head that, historically it was a vulnerability for us to admit our weaknesses. So now I'm supposed to go in front of this healthcare provider with whom I may not have a connection and admit this, and I might just be left invulnerable. And we may not even be conscious that we're doing that. Mm-hmm. So I share my stories because I do have tenure. I have safety. I share it so that people can talk about it without having to talk about their particular situation and their work environment. But my goal for them is to provide safety. You have to have safety to disclose. And you have to have discernment to know, I am in an industry where people are not there yet. Where can I go outside of this to get the support I need? How can I create this for myself?
Well, and I'm also think here I am a white woman. We're having this conversation. For a Black woman looking for safety and looking for community and navigating her experience of burnout, her experience of pain, depression, maybe neurodivergence, does that really need to be with other Black women? Or is it fair for me to come into the space and be having this conversation and asking the questions?
I think it depends on who you are and what you need. Personally, most of the wellness training I did for the past 2 decades has been in spaces where I was the only or few people of color. Most recently, I just went on a retreat with this organization called New Seneca Village, and they're catering to BIPOC women in social justice. And they are doing this in a way where they're providing for their needs and that there's no cost. And so they're really trying to get people that are like at the vulnerable intersections of society and make sure that they can sustain their leadership. And so when I entered into that environment and I saw all of these other people who I knew were risking it all in the world, and they were claiming deep care for themselves, that's what really unlocked something for me. And I went through things in that week where I think I went deeper to a place that was really scary. And when I got to that place and I put myself on display, someone just looked at me and said, there's nothing to fix. It just is. Mm-hmm. And that gave me a comfort and a confidence that I'm taking back into my life. Now, I am going to do it differently when I have other people, but I think that's important as well. I am someone who wants to be around effective allies, right? I work in an environment where I'm going to be one of few. And so I think for me, it's been helpful to have both, but I think it's really important for the individual to say, what is the most supportive for me right now?
Right. And it sounds like getting honest with, let me get out of my head, check in with my body and what feels safe. Where do I feel most safe to be fully expressed? Where do I feel safe to be held? Where do I feel safe to try on these new versions of self-love, receiving of someone else's love, giving of love?
And I've been in environments where I've had people, especially in my work, because like I said, the work I tend to do, I am calling everyone in, but I'm intentionally calling them in and saying, okay, we have to have some agreements of what we're doing here. And that's what I think was missing in the wellness space for too long. We were not holding people accountable. We were not creating safe containers, and we were allowing people access to each other in their vulnerable states to do harm to themselves and each other. So if we really want to move forward, we have to center those people that have those lived experiences and say, how can we create containers where you feel safe and respected and valued? Because this can happen in other environments, but how intentionally are we creating that? And are we really centering you and how that comes together?
So good. I'm aware of time. I'm curious if there's anything else that feels unsaid. Sure. That we didn't dig into. Anything else you want to add? And then, if you want to tell whoever's listening about your book, about any upcoming retreats. I mean, what feels unfinished for you?
What feels unfinished for me is to acknowledge that, and I'm not going to limit this to Black women, this is my experience, but I want to say this to anyone. Sometimes when you have been able to cross a certain threshold in your life, so perhaps you are partnered and other people are not partnered. We're able to reach a certain professional level. There are a lot of things that come in our lives and they separate us from connection with community. And we are told to turn and give back to those other people, which is wonderful, but with no acknowledgement to what we need to continue to be fed and well. And we end up feeling invisible and we feel unheard. And we don't feel safe asking for that help. So I want to make an invitation to that container of people that are like, I know on the outside, I look like I have it all together, but on the inside, I'm crumbling and I don't feel safe explaining this to anyone. So that's what I want to call in. And I just want to say that I'm a connector. I'm not a therapist. I'm not here to like make you whole, but I will stand alongside you and encourage you as you explore your answers. My website is empoweredtoexhale.com, and I am on Instagram and Threads as Ask Dr. Portia, and I'm sure we'll provide the rest. But honestly, it's just amazing to be able to speak with you, knowing that we have, I don't know if I want to do the math. Did you do the math before? Because it's going to be scary. Is it 26
I
years?
think we must have met initially in 98.
Okay, so that's 26 years ago. And I just celebrate that we have had authentic community with each other. And I think that's exactly the testimony that we are, is that you need both, right? Because you felt like a kindred spirit the moment that you were like, I'm going to go become a midwife. And we've seen something in each other over the years, and we continue to bring out the best in each other while allowing each other to be real. So I just want to end this by celebrating you, thanking you for what you're doing. Thank you for continuing to have an open heart and learning and holding space.
Yeah, thank you too. And for you, I think for me, you've also been a really safe container for me to go, okay, what are the better questions to ask? How do I show up differently in a more inclusive way so that individuals of all different walks of life can receive my heart? Because my heart's always in a good place, but often I can be direct or confrontational. There's people that go, whoa, it's intense, because my energy can be a little laser sharp or a lot laser sharp.
I'm the same way. So I think that's why we mesh well together. That's actually one of my favorite speakers. But for people to have what we have, you have to make it safe for each other. You have to be able to say, hey, I heard you say XYZ. Are you aware of how that might land differently? Right?
Yeah.
I think that's something that we're not doing a great job of collectively right now, where we could really improve.
I appreciate you, Portia. And I know that you're really making big ripple effects in the world from a public health perspective as a professor, the book that you're writing, the work that you're doing with the executives, speaking retreats, and hopefully we'll be able to create something together. Just stay tuned. We're starting to brainstorm. All right. Appreciate you. And for those of you listening, you're welcome to reach out to either of us if any of this has stirred something in within you that you have additional questions. We'll make sure in the show notes Portia's Instagram handle and website. And for those of you listening to this real time in Facebook, Portia's not on Facebook very much, so don't use that. But you can comment down below. I'll go over and check it out. And if you're listening to the podcast and this has been inspiring for you or thought-provoking for you, I would love to ask that you leave a review and make sure it's 5 stars. And until next time, Portia, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate you. All right. Ciao, ciao, everybody.